Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. I'm your host for this episode, Justin Remer, and you're here for another SKYLIT author discussion. And today I'm talking with the author of the Genre 33 and a Third series entry on pub rock, Mark Wilkerson. He's written a number of great music books. Who Are You? The Life of Pete Townsend, Hollywood Dream, The Thunderclap Newman Story. He's the co-author of Pearl Jam 20. He's got a lot of great credits. I'm curious. This is sort of like a take me back nostalgic thing, but like, what turned you on to music? Like, do you remember as a young person what turned you on to music?
I think what kind of really cemented it for me was, or what kind of made me step back and open my eyes real wide was, so I was born in the UK. In 1969, and the end of the 70s, there was like a phenomenon called the mod revival, where the Who kind of had a resurgence. Their Quadrophenia film came out in 79. Also, the really well-known documentary "The Kids Are All Right" came out that same year, and there was a resurgence of interest in like the mod culture.
Sure.
Which was, very kind of pop art, kind of flag target type designs, kind of throwback 60s type, rock and roll. So the Who had a resurgence. The Jam were huge at that time, owed a large debt to the Who, both through music and through the visual stuff. Madness were big at that point. A bunch of kind of bands that owed a debt to the past, which I guess pretty much all bands owe a debt to the past. But
Sure.
it's the bands that this genre kind of spawned, that the pub rock genre kind of spawned. So that's why I really enjoyed working on this book. But that period, I was just starting to get into early adolescence too. So, there's a little bit of angst going on and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when the music that's when I really started to kind of, my ears started to open up and my eyes started to open up, and I'm like, all right, this makes me feel a certain way and I like it, So I got in, early Who, got into the Jam, got into the Kinks and started to discover stuff, got into Madness and, the whole, I fully embraced the mod revival. So I'd say, 79, 80, that's when it kind of blew up for me. And then a couple of years later, we moved to the States. I was 14, which isn't great for a 14-year-old, in the middle of adolescence to kind of uproot. And at the same time, my parents' marriage kind of fell apart. So I kind of it became my refuge. Mm-hmm. And it also became, because we moved to the States, British identity kind of thing for me as well. So I kind of demanded more of music, and it delivered, So that really cemented it for me.
That's excellent. See, I'm a fan of a lot of like new wave and punk stuff, and it's very interesting. And so sort of like through finding out who turned them on, like finding out about pub rock. So like coming to your book, I was familiar with a few of the acts like Brinsley Schwarz, Graham Parker, but there were many other bands. And what I like about your book is you take it year by year from 1970 to 1977, and you talk about not only the sort of quick changes that happen in this scene, but also like the way people are turning other people onto stuff, and how, Joe Strummer was referring to himself as Woody after Woody Guthrie, but then quickly is like, let me, I've seen the Sex Pistols and there's no going back. Like, there's all these changes and stuff.
Yeah. It's very much like a domino effect in many different ways. And that was something like you, I wasn't familiar with quite a lot of the music from this pub rock period. Mm-hmm. But I knew it was the period that formed the music that I loved. Mm. And I also, as a kid in the UK back then, I remember, these real, very memorable characters. Ian Dury being probably the number one. The visual and the sound of Ian Dury was something that was just not like anything else that I'd heard. But there were a lot of kind of unique characters at that time, but also the like socioeconomic stuff that was going on in the UK in the 70s. There was a lot of bad stuff happening. There was inflation, there was unemployment, there was violence, like physical violence when the IRA, the conflict in Northern Ireland really took off in 1969-70, and it just worsened and worsened as the 70s progressed. It shaped that music. It helped to, there was already a DIY kind of trend happening, spurred in part by pub rock and kind of carried by pub rock, but then it started to harden as well because of what was going on in society. So all of that, I knew little bits of it, but going into it, I really got to dig in and understand it a little bit better. And yeah, I laid it out just like you said, very kind of basic, just year by year. First of all, because these genre series books are quite short. The last book I did, the one on Thunderclap Newman, was about 120,000 words. This is 40,000. So it's a third the size of the last book I did. And it's really hard to write a book that short, but because I like to yap, as you can already tell. But
well, no, that's why I chuckled, because as soon as you said how many words the Thunderclap Newman was, like, oh, this is greatly reduced from that. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like the whole pub rock approach was DIY, back to basics, return to roots, cut out the BS, cut out the adornments, and just focus on the necessities. You know what I mean? And that's what I wanted to do with the book too. So I just thought, just go year by year. Don't try and make it all fancy.
Yeah. So I know that you said that you wanted to do a reading of the introduction, give folks a flavor of it. This seems like a good spot to do that.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just a couple of pages. It's the very first. It's the introduction to the book, so I probably don't need to explain that. Pub rock was a relatively brief phenomenon in 1970s London, which, due to its short duration and the inconspicuous nature of its venues, can easily be overlooked. It wasn't identifiable by a particular sound or by a certain style. It was simply music that was played in pubs. A diverse mix was represented there: roots rock, country, R&B, soul, and rock and roll, both the good time variety and the harder edge stuff. Pub rock generally took place in tiny venues, limited by sheer size to comparatively few patrons, and its recorded legacy is slim and often difficult to access. But despite these factors, it's not overstating matters to say that pub rock facilitated a sea change in popular music in the UK in the mid-70s, which sent reverberations far beyond its borders. It saw a return to roots in both musical content and performance, a reestablishment of the key connection between band and audience. This laid the groundwork for a flood of sorely needed, fresh, urgent music, which landed in the late 70s, soon known collectively as New Wave, before splintering off into a host of its own fascinating subgenres. Pub rock impacted countless subsequent artists and bands of monumental stature, starting with Blondie, Madness, Elvis Costello, The Jam, the Sex Pistols, The Clash, and on and on. Its legacy can be seen in the subsequent 5 decades of popular music, evident in song structure and delivery, in record sleeve and advertising design, and in the sartorial choices of its purveyors. But more tangible brick, mortar, and vinyl living links to pub rock's origins are less easy to come by. Many of the pubs within the circuit that thrived in the mid-70s are no longer standing. Many of the albums that were recorded during that period are either out of print, or they don't hold up, or both. The genre's birthplace was a pub called the Tally Ho, built early in the Victorian era on Fortis Road, 4 miles north of central London, in what was then rural Kentish town and is now a bustling urban community. The Tally Ho was one of many large pubs which sprang up during a housing boom in North London as an influx of Irish labour arrived in England to build the railways. The pub was demolished in 2006. The site today holds a co-op retail shop topped by some unremarkable flats. Facing the rear of the building is the Kentish Town Forum, which began life as an Art Deco cinema in 1934 before becoming a dance hall, and ultimately the 2,000-plus capacity music venue it is today, outlasting the influential pub that once stood in its shadow. As with all stories, the history of pub rock is rife with chance and coincidence, luck and misfortune. The Tally Ho just happened to be the nearest pub to Alma Street, a 10-minute walk down Kentish Town Road, where the oddly named American band Eggs Over Easy had rented a house in late 1970. Accustomed to playing in bars and clubs around their native New York City, they were looking for somewhere to perform. At the time, the Tally Ho was a jazz-only venue, catering to a genre beyond the Eggs' purview. Despite this, they managed to talk their way into a one-off gig, confident that their brand of rock had an audience in this foreign territory. The rest is history. So that's how I kick it off.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting that without getting too grand about it, pub rock is kind of more like an ethos than it is like a sound, because it does also seem to warp and change so quickly over the 6 or 7 years that you talk about.
Yeah, and I think and part of that surprised me. Of course, going into this, I didn't know anything about Eggs Over Easy or the origins of this thing. From my kind of peripheral awareness of it was Dr. Feelgood and Ian Dury and Kilburn and the High Roads and that kind of stuff. So yeah, its roots were very much kind of begun by the band and Creedence Clearwater Revival and Crosby, Stills and Nash kind of coming over to the UK and people wanting to kind of emulate this return to roots, back to basics thing. But it was in a very laid back, Americanized kind of country-ish, approach. But some key pieces were already there. A dedication to craft, a focus on musicianship, not wanting to knock people over the head with the volume of your amplifiers, but actually turning down a little bit.
Yeah, I love that detail about Brinsley Schwartz, like being the quietest band, like just
turning down. Yeah, almost as their own act of rebellion. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like everybody else is doing this, we're going to do this, and there is that. Brinsley Schwartz especially seemed to, and I think it seemed like Nick Lowe was very much kind of the catalyst behind a lot of it. They were very kind of anti, and of course, so not to get off on another tangent, but yeah, it definitely started as a kind of a Americanized, laid back approach, and then, as I said a little bit earlier, I think what happened were the circumstances of the time started. Well, there were a few things. There's the circumstances of the time, like the life in the UK started to kind of harden as the years went on, based on economic conditions, based on power cuts and labor strife and inflation and unemployment and violence because of the conflict in Northern Ireland. So there were a lot of things going on that affected people's everyday lives. So they also started to affect style and music and everything else. Also, at the same time, you've got American rock and roll starting, kind of harder rock and roll starting to seep over the New York Dolls.
Oh yeah.
Lou Reed, the Stooges. All of these acts, like the Stooges, were in the UK in the early 70s recording an album and performing. Lou Reed was over there performing. The New York Dolls came over and performed. So all these little influences started to kind of, be, in music and in art and everything else. Everybody steals from everybody else.
Yeah. But that's such a contrast though, because you have the initial acts who are kind of like inspired by like Dylan and the band, but then to be inspired by like Lou Reed and the New York Dolls, like that's a different flavor for sure.
Yeah. So it's like they picked up all these sometimes seemingly like incongruous influences and it got assimilated into the kind of the culture and that it just kind of picked up steam. And I think it culminated in the explosion that was punk, that blew up towards the end of 76, beginning of 77 there.
Because in a way too, it's also like, even from the beginning, pointedly sort of like a reaction against what's big, like the prog rock, the glam rock, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I kind of, it kind of occurred to me that was like the early 70s to me when reading about it. And these old, I love digging into these old like Melody Maker magazines, the UK music weeklies and stuff.
Sure.
Not just reading the stories, but and listening to the music, but also looking at the ads and stuff like that.
Sure.
But it occurred to me that it was like rock's Baroque period. You know what I mean? It was just like a lot of frills and adornment, and actually not just musical adornment, but you got Rick Wakeman with his glittering cape and all this just like decadent amounts of keyboards and instruments and things like that. And I talk about it in the book, like ELP was setting up a show where they had doing a collaboration with a ballet, and they had like a separate stages, an insane amount of lights and all this other it's like there wasn't enough going on, so they just had to add and add and add and add. So and I said this to somebody else earlier, it's easy to make fun of it, but it was very, very popular. It was immensely popular.
Yeah.
But also I think it represented a disconnect. It was very, I think my favorite word to describe it is it was very inaccessible to a lot of people. I don't think you could just show up at a prog show and think, oh man, I should get a guitar and try and do that. You know what I mean? It was very, because they were very accomplished musicians, and it seemed like there were many layers many layers between like the average Joe who doesn't know, knows a couple of chords to this level of playing that these prog bands were doing. But if you could see that, some band in a pub playing some pretty basic rock and roll, you're like,
yeah,
that's not too far removed from something that maybe I could try to do. You know what I mean? And I think that's why it kind of more reflected people or like a street attitude and actual life, and like prosaic reality.
Yeah. I like too that it's kind of, linked in with the bands too, but you have a lot of discussions of like what the venues were, like what the pubs were. You give a sense that like before these bands were coming in, it was pretty much like just jazz. Was that kind of like just what folks would expect? They go out, we're going out for drinks, it'll be jazz. That's what it'll be like that.
Yeah. I don't know, but the impression that I got, and by from reading and from talking to some people that were there, it was music you could drink to. Like I say that in the book, it's like background music.
Yeah,
I would imagine that the owners of these pubs or the managers of these pubs were fine with that, as long as you're, buying some beer, bringing, so you're not just sitting there listening to music. And I guess what Eggs Over Easy kind of uncovered for them was, you can play this kind of music and people still buy beer, and people, maybe it was a little bit of a palate cleanse kind of thing, as far as these audiences seem to like it. We're bringing in a different crowd, so let's go with it. Because quite quickly after Eggs Over Easy's first show, they start to okay, we'll give you 1 gig a week. Okay, we'll give you 2 gigs a week, and they start to kind of elbow the jazz bands out. And a couple of other bands. Actually, the second band that kind of took off was Bees Make Honey. And they were formed by one of the members of a jazz band that was starting to look around and realize that gigs were drying up.
Yeah. I also, this is a side topic, but I also love the names of so many of these groups. Like the fact that Eggs Over Easy and Bees Make Honey are kind of like these both weird food phrases.
Yeah.
And then you have like Blank and the Blanks, like Chili Willy and the Red Hot Peppers.
Yeah. And Ace Splash and the Dynamos.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. They were not boring band names. Yeah.
No,
it's like, so some pretty funny, it's just like some of the stuff was out of left field. And I think that was refreshing, in many ways. The music and the somewhat of a don't give a crap attitude. Yeah. And a big part of this, I started talking about Brinsley Schwartz and their kind of lack of willingness to kind of buy into any kind of hype was based on, this event that they had in the early 70s where they had like an overzealous kind of management idea. So Brinsley Schwartz are playing these little gigs in the UK, and through just like sheer effort by their manager, managed to land a gig opening for Van Morrison.
Oh, right.
And the Quicksilver Messenger Service, I think, at a massive venue in New York, and they flew a plane load of journalists and fans over, and Brinsley Schwartz were stuck in due to transportation issues and customs issues, and didn't get to the venue until very soon before they was to take the stage. So there was like no rehearsal. It was a very kind of average, underwhelming show. And meanwhile, this plane load of fans and journalists that they flew to the U.S., they had their plane broke down. There were delays. They got to the venue at the last minute too, and they were kind of pissed off and agitated and inebriated as well.
Right.
So it was actually it became known as the hype. And was like a lesson to people of, this was a very overhyped event that turned out to be very underwhelming. But it's like after that, Brinsley Schwartz were just like, in their own little microcosm, they did the same thing that the whole movement was already starting to do, which was just like, we just need to get back to basics. We need to focus on our craft. We need to cut out all the BS. Don't listen to what's going on and just focus on what we're doing. So they became like this little example of the bigger movement. And it's cool. Brinsley Schwartz was this thread that ran the entire length of this. Well, not necessarily Brinsley Schwartz. They eventually broke up, but Nick Lowe is the thread that runs through this entire story. And there's several, there's a couple of pubs that run through almost the entire story, but I find that little piece of it fascinating too, that there's pieces of it that you can follow all the way through. And that's another reason I focus on first of all, it's called pub rock. So that's why I focus on the pubs. But I tried to make sure I pay attention to the actual, to actually where this stuff was going down.
Yeah. Well, it was cool because I forget what the context was, but there's definitely like a couple of albums I have seen that were like live at the Hope and Anchor. So to like know the story of the Hope and Anchor. And I love the idea of this crowded basement that has like terrible stairs for like bringing your equipment down. So people have to bring it down the beer chute like that.
Yes.
That's such a good detail.
Yeah, and speaking of, the Melody Maker articles and the Sounds and NME articles, that was a great Melody Maker article that I quote from in the book where I think it's Melody Maker, where the Stranglers are playing in the Hope and Anchor. Mm-hmm. And, I don't really consider the Stranglers to be a pub rock band, but this example of them playing at the Hope and Anchor, it was Sounds magazine. Sorry, not Melody Maker, but so Mick Brown, this writer from Sounds magazine, actually is a roadie for them during this gig, and he also roadies for Deep Purple like a couple of weeks earlier at a massive venue in London. So he's doing like both ends of the scale. But he goes into detail over the Stranglers they used to like carry all their stuff in an old ice cream van, and they're like unloading the ice cream van, and they got this freaking Hammond organ that weighs a ton, and they're trying to lower it. They can't get it down the stairs, so they have to put it like on ropes down this beer chute, and they're all lowering it down. They're going, we don't know how the hell we're going to get this thing back up at the end of the night, and they're talking about how the equipment barely fits on the stage, and they're putting their amplifiers on top of like beer barrels and stuff like that. So it's very cool how some of the journalism from the time kind of takes you there and shows you the close quarters of it all. There's a quote from Wilco Johnson in there too. It said, I kept clunking people with my guitar because he liked to move around quite a bit. So.
Yeah. From Dr. Feelgood, right?
From Dr. Feelgood, yeah. Another one of those kind of very idiosyncratic characters that you just don't forget, Wilco, yeah.
Well, even just because what's his real name? John Wilkinson?
John Wilkinson.
But he flipped it to Wilco Johnson.
Yeah, just to kind of have a cooler stage name,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, so you talk about Nick Lowe. Maybe just for listeners of the podcast who aren't that adept, there are a lot of interesting pub rock acts that sort of feed into like acts that kind of break out internationally. So like Nick Lowe from Brinsley Schwarz, also the
Yeah.
101ers. Can you talk a little bit about some of those acts?
Yeah, some of those threads that came to be much better known. So there was, Brinsley Schwarz was the name of a band that Nick Lowe was a bass player in, and as the years progressed, Nick Lowe became their leading songwriter. As the Brinsley Schwarz albums are very interesting because they're hard to find, but they're very interesting if you kind of lay them out because they pretty much did an album a year. And you can hear the evolution of their music it starts off with kind of Crosby, Stills and Nash type harmonies and stuff, a little bit of, dare I say, prog in some of them. And there's guest musicians and stuff like that. And as the years go on, the songs tighten up, they shorten in length, and the guest musician credits on the albums drop off. It becomes, everything becomes exactly what pub rock was. They get tighter and tighter. There was a band called, and of course, eventually you get into 1976. Nick Lowe is now a solo performer, and he produces, or he records a couple of two sides of a single that become the first record released by Stiff Records, which is a legendary label. There's another band called Flip City that were known as kind of a Brinsley Schwarz cover band in a way. Sure. Their lead singer was Elvis Costello. You've got the 101ers, who were a pub rock band that played at a pub called the Chippenham. And their lead singer was a guy named, Woody Meller for a while, and then he became known as Joe Strummer. So the Clash came out of this thing. You've got Ian Dury, who was in a band called Kilburn and the High Roads. He was the lead singer of, Kilburn and the High Roads. And then he emerged as a solo act on Stiff Records. Who else? Graham Parker was a pub rocker that came out of the pub rock scene. Dr. Feelgood, not really any Wilco did some solo stuff, but Dr. Feelgood were really known just for Dr. Feelgood. There weren't any characters that kind of came out of that.
Well, even you talk about Ace's Paul Carrack, or Carrack, however you pronounce it, but he becomes like a player who just like pops up. Like now he's in Squeeze, now he's playing with Mike and the Mechanic. Like that's just an interesting thing too, to realize he goes all the way back to this scene.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I came over to the States, I remember the big phenomenon of MTV, and I remember Paul Carrack, "Don't Shed a Tear," like a solo song, and I was, start reading this. I'm like, oh, he was in Ace. I had no idea. But yeah, these names keep popping up. Another name who kind of runs through a lot of this thread, and he wasn't ever really in a pub rock band, but it was Dave Edmunds. Dave Edmunds was the house producer at a studio that at Rockfield Studios in Monmouthshire in Wales, and a lot of the pub rock bands recorded there, and he produced the stuff, and sometimes he played on it. And of course, he was in this amazing rock band called Rockpile that really were not a pub rock band, but it was, Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds were part of that band. So it's a phenomenal band. But yeah, the Dave Edmunds name goes right the way through this thing too. Chris Spedding. Yeah, the guitarist, Chris Spedding. He kind of pops up in the pub rock history as well. And of course, he's a link to he recorded some early demos with the Sex Pistols. There's a producer, of course, it's like a direct link. Chris Thomas, legendary producer, produced, Roxy Music, Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks, the first few Pretenders albums, In Excess, Pete Townsend, three best known solo albums. Chris Thomas produced the first single by Kilburn and the High Roads, which was Ian Dury's band. One of the reasons that he wound up producing Nevermind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols was they liked the way Rough Kids, the first single, sounded. Another thread,
Yeah. Actually, speaking of producers, I was kind of amazed because I don't know the scope of his career, but like I knew that he did like Def Leppard and Shania Twain, but that Mutt Lange produced some of the pub rock bands. So
yeah, it's amazing. And that's the kind of I love researching stuff like this because you have all these moments like you're like, oh wow. Or like Chris Spedding, who we were just talking about, was in the Wombles band. And of course, when I was a kid, I remember the Wombles. It was a TV show in the UK, and Chris Spedding was actually in the band and had to like like a Womble was like a fictional kind of rodent looking character that lived underground. And they actually put on costumes and performed. And he was, the Wombles were like a big thing, like a novelty band, but a really successful one that had like top 10 hits in the UK. And this like kind of pub rock punk stalwart is in the middle of it.
Well, let's talk about some of the other bands too that didn't quite like maybe translate to American audiences, but still seem very interesting, like Ducks Deluxe.
Yeah, there's a lot of bands. Again, back to that original statement where pub rock wasn't a type of music in a way. It's not like a certain kind of music. Like we said, it started off as a kind of laid back Americana, almost, maybe like the Eagles or something, similar to that. Ducks Deluxe come along, named after a slot machine in a roadside, cafe. And they're like the first example of kind of all out rock and roll, loud guitar, more abrasive vocals, kind of good timey vibe though, not like menacing necessarily, but much, much more kind of hard rock and roll. They came along and they were the first ones to kind of do that, like throwback kind of, 50s rock and roll. And they're an example of, like, if you go, a lot of these bands, you go out to the streaming services and look them up and you'll find a kind of a jumble of songs. But if you actually listen to the actual albums, it's much more, in my mind, satisfying because you kind of hear how they evolve. Mm-hmm. You hear the songs as they were originally laid out, which kind of sounds a little bit snobbish, purist or whatever. But there's like something to that. Like, I'm okay with listening to a greatest hits or whatever, but listening to Ducks Deluxe albums, and that was another cool thing. Like, I got to collect some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. I went over to the UK a couple of times. I kind of combined it with some promotional stuff for my last book, but went to some record stores over there, got some of these old records and stuff. And I went on a really cool, there's a guy named Aidan McManus who runs a company or a tour deal called Flipside London Tours. Mm-hmm. And he gave me like a private tour of pub rock venues. And he really clearly did a lot of homework and took me around, showed me all these old pubs. He took me and showed me the old studios, like Pathway Studios in Islington, which was like where the Damned first record and Nick Lowe's stuff was recorded and Elvis Costello's first album. And it's tiny, but like I had this whole list of places that I wanted to go and he blew that up away. But just back to, so I started collecting these records and stuff and listening to them. So yeah, you've got Ducks Deluxe, you've got Bees Make Honey, who had a great album called Music Every Night, which you can't find on streaming. You can find this stuff on YouTube, but it's a shame that some of this stuff isn't, a little bit more readily available.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's hard to find in the book, so I was like, well, let me check Discogs, and I was like, oh, $75, $100. Yeah, that's a little more than I'm willing to shell out right now.
Right. And then, you mentioned the Cursal Flyers, and they're another one. They kind of came along middle of this kind of arc, and their biggest hit, their style was more, originally at least, more in line with the earlier pub rock bands, a little bit Americanized, a little bit kind of laid back. And their biggest hit was like they had a very charismatic and funny frontman. Mm. And they would do these like parody songs where they would like put on accents. And sometimes they had a song called Kung Fu and he'd put a bald, because the TV show at the time, with David Carradine, he'd put this like bald head on and like this fake, extremely probably inappropriate cultural appropriation or whatever you want to call it, like Asian accent to go along with it. But it was a very much like a parody thing. And they had a song about a guy who's in a laundromat. It was called Little Does She Know. He's in a laundromat and he sees this girl that he used to go out with doing her laundry. Mm-hmm. He's finding out that she's two-timing him by the laundry that she's doing in the laundromat. and they would like perform it on top of the pops with like big fake boxes of laundry detergent and stuff like that. And that was like a huge hit.
Yeah.
Um,
I that's what I listened to like some of the songs that you call out, and I listened to that one. You're right. It has like this big like leader of the pack, like 50s wall of sound.
yes.
Like it's so grand for such a kind of yeah, it's kind of pastiche or like a parody. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing is, like with the curse, and that's the thing, that I did a 10 best pub rock tracks or whatever. And that's the song that the Cursal Flyers are best known for. But they put out an album, I think it was in 77, called Five Live Cursals, which was recorded at the Marquee Club in London. And it's got some really ass-kicking rock and roll songs on it, like really, really good, hard, fast, expertly played rock and roll that shows that they really knew their stuff. And I would much rather listen to that, really. But if I'm going to give you a top 10, I've got to give you their most famous song, But I do mention in there, hey, you should go listen to this as well, because these guys weren't just fun, They were, and that's the thing about all these pub rock bands. There was no room for pretense. You're in a very close quarter environment. You've either got it or you don't. You have to bring it. It's very authentic in many ways.
Yeah, and also the drummer from that band has sort of become like the pub rock historian, because I read his book on Nick Lowe, but I guess I didn't put together that he was also a musician in the scene as well.
Yeah, Will Birch. So when I went over to London, he was kind enough. He still lives out in Southend, as far as I know, which is not particularly close to London. But he came into London and spent a couple of hours buying me drinks and talking to me in a place there in London. So he was really, really kind, very open, and just really just like, hey, the more word gets out about this whole pub rock thing, the better, But yeah, he did a kind of the definitive history on pub rock called No Sleep Till Canvey Island. That's hard to find right now. And last I heard, you can get it on an ebook. I think it's on Kindle, but getting an actual hard copy of it is very difficult. Last I heard, he was working on a reboot of the printed one. But yeah, he did a really good biography of Nick Lowe, and he did a really good biography of Ian Dury as well. And of course, he was in the middle of the scene, so he was right there. He knows exactly what he's talking about. He's not like me having to, go back and try and reconstruct. So Will was his perspective and opinions on this thing kind of carry a lot of extra weight because of his status as an actual, pub rocker.
That reminds me a little bit too, because you were talking about how much fun you were having going through the old music magazines, and you can feel that in the book, because you do include sizable quotes that feel like you're sort of like, it's nice, it like you're enjoying the way they're describing it, like there'll be like a description of a show, and it'll just have that flavor to it.
Yeah, like Nick Kent describing Ian Dury, for those who are not aware, is a lot of these guys were some of it didn't translate to the US. Ian Dury contracted polio when he was a young child, and as a result of that, one side of his body was essentially kind of withered, like it didn't develop properly. So he walked with a cane, and one arm was essentially, not very useful, and it was noticeably kind of withered. And he would like play it up. And he had a drummer who was born with a congenital defect in his legs, who used crutches. So this band comes out, the drummer is using crutches to get out to the drums, and Ian Dury would be the last one to come out there. And Nick Kent is describing all of this in the NME as far as seeing this for the first time. And he's describing how long it takes Ian Dury to get out to the microphone. And he grabs onto the microphone and kind of hangs onto it, which is a very John Lydon thing. And he describes that. So I love the way he described it. And I thought I should kind of replicate that as succinctly as possible in the book. The other one that I can remember is Joe Strummer had a band called the 101ers, and they were known. They were like the Clash was known for being incredibly intense. The 101ers were known for being really intense, and they played in this place called the Chippenham in an upstairs room. And there were some really kind of shady characters around, and there was like the threat of violence in the air. And this writer, I think it was from Melody Maker, describes this show and how it just turned into a freaking melee. And the cops showed up, and it's just that's why I included that description, because it was just like, you had to be there. I just need to shut up and let this guy talk, and explain it. So it's really cool.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you did. Like that's kind of the joy, I think, of doing the research, is being able to like share the goodies. So I'm glad that you were able to share some of the goodies.
Well, and a big part of this too, like I said, it's not just the music, it's the culture too. And a big piece of that, and a big, very uniquely British thing at the time, was the music media, particularly the print media. It was a very British thing. Melody Maker, NME, Record Mirror, these weekly papers that focused on music. You had Rolling Stone in the US that started, I think, in 1967, but Rolling Stone didn't didn't solely focus on music. It had politics as well. These papers in the UK were solely music, and they started to really find their kind of momentum as the 70s progressed. And I think a big part of it was because there were power cuts. The economy was tanking. You didn't need electricity to buy a newspaper. So
Sure.
People started to really plug into these papers, and they sold hundreds of thousands of copies every week. And they would, of course, make their way to the States too. They became big proponents of the pub rock scene and played a key role in kind of championing it and communicating what was going on. So I thought it was important to sample that a little bit too, to give people the flavor of. And again, I wasn't there, and these guys were. So it's cool to listen. So I include some kind of firsthand accounts of shows like the ones I talked about, but I also I talk a little bit about a couple of columns that people, where people are commenting on, the first wave of pub rock bands is going away. What's coming next? Or some of the poll results are really cool too. Like when the Beatles, had disbanded a couple of years before this whole thing kind of started up, and they were talking about, we really need something fresh and new, to come along, and it's not prog and it's not glam, and it's like the scene was ripe for it. Or when you get to the end of this whole thing, I include some of the poll results talking about the biggest bore. Like at the beginning of 1977, one of the music weeklies, their poll results from the year before, biggest bore was punk. It's like, that's how long punk lasted. It's already boring in 1977. I thought it was very kind of illustrative of what I'm trying to describe.
Totally. I really enjoyed reading it. I think it's chock full of good stuff for folks that are interested in the music, and especially music of this era. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to cover before we wrap this up?
No, I think it's just in a way, it's like me trying to understand where the music that I love came from, and also to understand a little bit of the background, like what was going on when I was a kid. I saw these little flashes of stuff on the TV, and I remember hearing about things and seeing things, but it helped me kind of contextualize everything, and it helped me understand where, some of the factors that kind of shaped that whole huge seismic shift from this, certain kind of music at the beginning of the 70s to a completely different kind of music at the end of the decade, that kind of just blew everything up. It reshuffled the deck, for everybody. And it didn't, it started, or it didn't really all start in London, but it all kind of crystallized in London and exploded there, and then it all kind of went back out all over the world, So it's a really cool genre of music to just explore. I had a great time doing it, and I hope that does just kind of it becomes evident when you read it.
Yeah, it's like a very cool puzzle piece that a lot of folks might have missed. So
I think it made sense to me the way it all came together, as far as the influences, the stuff that happened along the way, and I'm like, okay, that all makes sense. You can see this, why the music gets harder as we go along, and it gets more blunt. And the bands at the beginning may be smiling and having a good time, but the bands in the middle are looking at you. They're quite sinister, and the guitarist is machine gunning you and glaring at you from the stage, and these are not necessarily friendly people. This lead singer's got a razor blade hanging from his ear and things like that, safety pins, and so yeah. It was a fun journey, and I hope to write, and I hope it is to read as well.
Well, I certainly think it is. Folks who are listening can pick it up in our Arts Annex store at 1814 North Vermont in Los Angeles. You can get it from our website, skylitbooks.com, or support your local bookshop. Please support the local bookshops or wherever you can get this book. Snag your copy of Pub Rock by Mark Wilkerson. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to check out the book featured in this episode, or others, please visit skylitbooks.com. If you're in the Los Angeles area, stop by for one of our live in-person author events. You can find a calendar on our website. If you like this podcast, leave us a review. It really helps us out. Our music is by Duck the Piano Wire. Till next time.